All right. Well, good morning and welcome to GNOFN's 2026 State of the State webinar. I am Keisha Smith, GNOFN Senior Director of Operations and Programs, and I'll be moderating today's conversation. So the 2026 Louisiana legislative session closed with consequential decisions that will reshape the greater New Orleans region for years to come. Politics has dramatically shifted the policy landscape. And at the same time, a looming state budget shortfall signals that the pressures on communities and the nonprofits that serve them will intensify heading into 2027. And we have an expert group of panelists who will help our members make sense of this year's legislative decisions, what those decisions mean for the greater New Orleans communities and the nonprofits our members fund, and what role funders can play as both a resource and a civic actor. So let's just begin with some quick introductions, and we can start with Ashley.
Good morning. It is so good to be here with all of you today. I'm Ashley Shelton with the Power Coalition for Equity and Justice. We are a power building table here in the state of Louisiana, working to increase the voice, vote, and power of historically disenfranchised populations here in the state of Louisiana. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Duplessis.
Good morning. My name is Royce Duplessis, State Senator for District 5, which encompasses New Orleans, mostly Uptown, Central City, 7th Ward, Treme. I even have some parts of Jefferson Parish. I've been serving in the Senate now a little bit over 4 years. I did 4 years in the House before that, and happy to be on this panel with you all this morning. And yes, Ashley and I are on a circuit, it seems, but I'm happy about it.
Well, hello everybody. My name is Stacy Roussel with Invest in Louisiana. We are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization focusing on education and advocacy around state policies that impact low and moderate income households in Louisiana. And it's great to be here. Just really grateful to the Funders Network and to my fellow panelists for all the work that we are able to do and do together.
Thank y'all. And I look forward to this conversation with you all because you are truly on the ground doing the work. And so I'll start with a question that's open to everyone. The 2026 session saw gains in some areas alongside some significant losses. So of the legislation that was passed, can you talk about those that will benefit our residents as well as those that might hurt our residents? And I see Senator Duplessis is off mute, so maybe we can just start there.
Yeah, I typically defer to the ladies being the only man on the panel, but since you called me out, I'll guess I'll go. You know, it's it goes without saying that I have a lot of concern with many of the bills that were passed this session. But I think, as I've always concluded, it really doesn't boil down to one bill or that's good or one bill that's bad or several bills that are good and several bills that are bad. It's really more about a culture and a governing style that concerns me the most. There was some good that came out of this legislative session, but I've passed a lot of good bills in my time in the legislature. And passing a bill is just one step in a much larger process, because then you have to get it implemented. And the hope that I always carry with me is that for every bill that's good that we get passed, that it can help contribute to a new style of governing and a new way of responding to the needs of the people of this state. Because I mean, you can fight and go to war just to get the right number of votes to get it over. And I've had bills where I've literally expended so much time, energy, and political capital to get passed, only to have that bill repealed the next year by a certain governing style and a certain way in which certain people view the communities that I'm there to represent. So that was a generalization and a broad answer, but to speak specifically on certain pieces of legislation that I think were good, and I'll talk a little bit about this hopefully throughout our conversation today. I was really pleasantly surprised that the legislature chose to put $50 million into the fortified roof program, and that's something we've been advocating for. So I was happy to support that effort, but ultimately that was a positive step that I think didn't get a lot of attention, didn't get a lot of headlines, but I think in the end it will have a very positive impact. Um, on the not so positive side, I could probably spend the next week talking about all of the bad bills that are going to have harmful impacts on our communities. But nothing in my opinion was worse than the decision by outside legislators who got together and basically ran roughshod over the city of New Orleans with legislations to reduce our representation and to take away our voice. And that was done through a lot of different means, but I think we're going to see it show up mostly in our criminal justice system. So we read a lot about it, but I think we're going to feel some negative consequences very soon as a result of that legislation.
Thank you for that. Man, the one thing is that I always have follow-up questions, but I know we are sticking to this time. We are sticking
Mm,
to these questions, and
mm.
hopefully we can dig a little bit deeper. But Ashley, do you want to weigh in?
Yes, my good friend Senator Duplessis was more than kind and generous in his comments about
Very. I was just warming it up for you to come
right,
in.
right.
Yeah.
I I think that one of the things that folks, should be really aware of is that, this governing style, the way that we've been legislating, since this governor came into office has been very fraught with lots of problems, right? And I think that it is there is a lot, there's so much loss, right, in terms of like what we can get done, and then what we can get done then we've seen get vetoed. And I think that what this particular session showed us that I think was particularly unfortunate was that New Orleans was particularly targeted. We saw so many really good bills, and then certainly appropriations being vetoed by this governor. We saw New Orleans being targeted in general. And so there wasn't a whole lot of good that came out of this session. I mean, I think the thing that I do appreciate about, like, so in the midst of this, this governor and, and this legislature, one of the things I did appreciate was that people really showed up this session, though, right? In the face of so many, bad bills, taking away our, the second majority minority congressional seat. We saw thousands of people show up at the Capitol and stay the course. I mean, I think for the hearings on the congressional bill, the hearings on the bill to remove the second majority minority seat, which I want to be clear, right? Because I think that there was a lot of confusion and a lot of subterfuge in how they talked about it. The Louisiana State Legislature absolutely could have redrawn a map with two majority minority districts. They chose not to. In addition to not drawing a map with two majority minority districts, they also could have given us our voting rights as a state. Like our state legislature and this governor has the right and the power, right, to protect my voting rights as an African American woman here in the Deep South, and had the pleasure of working with Senator Duplessis on Senate Bill 365, which was to create our own voting rights, language and protections here in the state of Louisiana. And we got a committee hearing, but we never got it out of committee. And it was, seriously, like this legislature saying to us that they were not going to allow voice and power for Black and other minorities in the state. And so I do think that like there's a very troubling side to this, but I also pray and well and know, right, like that they saw the fact that when they had the hearings on the congressional maps, that there were over 500 people in the Capitol on that Friday. They closed the cafeteria so that people wouldn't have anything to eat, but we had folks busting, that were brought buses in from all over the state, Every single committee hearing room on the Senate side was completely full, the hallway completely full. And so regardless of what they were trying to do, there was clearly a very strong pushback from community, all ages, all races, saying that this was a problem, that they didn't want this. And then they tried to move the second hearing, move it up and change the date. And still, folks stayed at the Capitol until 6:30 a.m. I think they started at 4 o'clock. Royce, I think they started like 4 p.m. They had changed it because it was supposed to be the following day. And folks still stayed and held them there till 6:30 a.m. to make sure that their voices were heard. And so I think the positive thing that came out of this session is that the people of Louisiana are fighting back and that they're not just sitting here allowing this legislature to destroy what's left of everything that we love about this place, what everything we love about being from Louisiana. And I would be remiss, Cree on my team would be very upset if I didn't shout out the paid parental leave for educators, SB 157, that passed, and as well as indigent defense now, for the 19th JDC. Now, Royce, you'll have to tell me if those were included in the ones that were vetoed. But as of our policy report, those two were two things that we had celebrated and lifted up at Power Coalition that were positives that came out of this session. But again, still assessing, like what all made it through once the governor kind of did all of his vetoes. But also Stacey will tell us too, because those are also two bills that she worked on.
Yeah, thank you for kicking it to Stacey. Go ahead.
All right, great. I will jump in. I'm going to build on what Senator Duplessis and Ashley said, because really what stood out to me was the role of the people. And in addition to what Ashley highlighted, which was a all-night hearing, and you can go back and kind of listen and see really people show up. They showed up on a number of issues. We had hundreds of young people come in from New Orleans, from Lake Charles for Opportunity and Action Day, which really highlights our disconnected youth and the need for state programs and a strong safety net to support them. We had hundreds of folks come in from around the state for Anti-Hunger Day at the Capitol to learn about advocacy, to learn about a process. The process, for those of us who are in the building, we know it inside and out. But it's not intuitive. It's really, when you want to go in and inform, it can be very daunting, right? Not everybody is as easy to talk to and as approachable as Senator Duplessis. And so depending on where you are in the state, that process can be overwhelming. So I want to just give a shout out and a real encouragement to all of the days at the Capitol. Dad's Day at the Capitol, I saw somebody shout that out too. Love it. People are making their voices heard. The other way that people are really making their voices heard in Louisiana is the constitutional amendments. So again, our elected officials are not always doing what the people want and what the people support. But when the people have an opportunity, they are showing up and they are making clear what they want. And they've done that through the constitutional amendments and defeating a number of them, again, when they have the opportunity to weigh in over the past couple of years. So, we are going to talk about some things that are discouraging. We're going to talk about a fiscal cliff coming. We're certainly going to talk about legislation that's bad for New Orleans. But I don't want us to lose that the people are informed, they are empowered, and they are acting. And that is something that we should all really take seriously.
Yeah, that's something to get excited about. And thinking about all of these people, right, and how they get there and how they're prepared. Like just sort of being in that space myself in the past, we know that there's multiple organizations that's really doing this work to bring people together. They're doing lobbying work, advocacy work, organizing work. We know that obviously just from what you all just said, that it really does take a village. It takes everyone. So where do you see the strongest opportunities for philanthropy to support these coordinated efforts, to help folks come together, organizations and residents, individuals, just doing this work to build on the benefits and mitigate the harm?
Well, I'm going to give a shout out to my friends that are here and just, say the work of all of those hundreds and thousands of people that the Power Coalition mobilized to get to the Capitol wasn't because overnight somebody created an email list, right? That was years and decades of trust building, of capacity building, so that when that notice came out, thousands of people received it. They knew what was happening and they showed up. And like Ashley said, uh, the outcome could have been far worse. In Louisiana, sometimes we have to measure wins by decreasing how bad something is or, mitigating harm. We don't always get the big offensive wins, right? But we can limit the harm to community. And I think that is an important role that philanthropy plays through the good times and the bad. There are times where we are going to have great wins, and there are times that we're not. And it's really philanthropy's long view and the opportunity to kind of keep that capacity and cadence up, regardless of what's happening, knowing that we have to be prepared and informed. So, just a big thank you to the groups that are doing the work and that the funders that make it possible for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Keisha, hi, Toya, y'all. Hey, everybody. I was going to share too, just following up on what Stacy shared. The investment in cross-sector collaboratives that help families navigate these multiple crises is really important. Also supporting advocacy infrastructure, just based on, the public systems that aren't kind of maybe working together. Our advocacy groups really are working really closely together. We are collaborating. We have very similar, goals and objectives as we talk about helping the people in our state. And then I had some real specific things for philanthropists, especially, representing the United Way, but, strengthening legal aid, just thinking about some of the environmental things that we're addressing, eviction prevention, benefits navigation, and also the big thing around funding community-based behavioral health, which we know impacts every part of what we do, whether it's education, workforce development, etc. So those are some specific things that I would love for our philanthropists to pay attention to.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
And Keisha, I just
No,
want
no,
to
thank you for that. I was actually going to go right to you, Ashley, and ask, like, what actually does it take to build that advocacy infrastructure? And I'm not sure if that's where you were going, but I also want you to, give us what you were intending to as well.
I mean, I think it's, part of it is, like I think continuously showing up in community. Like we don't just show up when it's an election. We don't just show up when it's legislative session. We are in community doing deep listening all the time. And in addition to that listening, also talking to folks about what's happening. I mean, right now we are going around the state on a road show with the Legislative Black Caucus and talking about the wins, right? And also the challenges that communities of color have been facing throughout this like throughout this most recent legislative session, and also what is to come, right? What we're already anticipating and seeing. And so I think for us, like one of the things that, like that's really important is that, I mean, like that kind of, to build that kind of advocacy and to build that kind of energy and community and that kind of trust. I mean, I think, we do, we knock doors, we text message, we phone bank, but also too in the last year, we've probably last year, but this year we're on track for about 200 events a year, right? Where we are constantly in community supporting, different community, whatever it is. I mean, whether it was Juneteenth, or any number of different summer festivals, like just being in the space. And part of what we understand about the opportunity that's before us is that like I think that, Louisiana and the South in general made a miscalculation in this rush to redistrict, this rush to, to like prove to the rest of this country that the South has not changed, right? That the South is still, leading the way to minimize the voices and the power of, Black and other minority communities. And so when we look at the fall elections, we have a huge opportunity. But that opportunity is about how do you educate folks about what's going to be on the ballot? Because, surprise, there are 10 more constitutional amendments that are going to be on the ballot in November. And so we have to educate and help people understand what those amendments mean. Typically we are against most amendments, but we do have one star in the midst, which is the bill that Senator Duplessis brought to address the lead pipe situation in New Orleans, which we're really excited about. And we're going to do that education. But that education shows up in those phone calls, in those events, in those touches where you're constantly in community talking to folks, also too, reducing the registration gap. We've got a huge voter registration gap and voter apathy that exists in the state of Louisiana because people feel like government doesn't work for them. And so we've been trying to bridge that gap and connect the dots for people about, well, if your kid's school and his experience or his or her experience in school doesn't feel like you want it to, but let me show you the people that are responsible, right? Like we don't have to go really far to understand like why systems are broken, who has the power to actually make things work in your community. And so the more we're able to bridge and educate people on how the electoral process impacts their lives, the more you can actually build that kind of build participation in the electoral process, but then also to realize the outcomes that we want to see as we go into the fall elections, which we have two public service commission seats. One centered, right in Orleans and Jefferson, mostly Jefferson Parish, but Orleans, parts of Orleans as well as North Louisiana, which could change the whole balance of the Public Service Commission. And so, we've got congressional as well. And so I do think that what we hope is that we see unprecedented turnout for the fall elections because people are angry and they are mad. And we hope that that anger extends into 2027 when we go to statewide elections. And so I do think that there's a momentum building. I do feel like, we haven't even talked about the big ugly bill and the cuts to Medicaid and SNAP that are getting ready to come down the pike and what that's going to mean for our families. And to be clear, I had an argument with a guy in an airport who told me I was being dramatic. I was like, no, people are going to die in Louisiana because people don't understand how much of our state's budget comes from the federal government, in particular when it comes to healthcare. And so when you talk about cutting Medicaid, you're talking about taking away people's access to healthcare in such a significant way that, again, that's going to be the impact in the state of Louisiana. And I wish I was being dramatic. I'm just actually being truthful. And I think that these are the things that we're going to have to to work with communities and have those conversations. And I think that it's going to have a big impact as we go into those statewide elections as well. But mostly it's education and engagement, and it's the continuous showing up, which, to Stacey's point, it takes resources, right? Like to be able to continuously show up in community, to educate, to be there for them. And again, I can't come talk to you about voting if I wasn't there when we've been working with communities in Point and Avoyles that were just hit by the tropical storm, right? Like, I mean, whatever it is, we're going to show up and we're going to work with communities because it matters whether it's a hurricane or if it's legislative session or an election.
Yeah, thank you for that. And what I'm hearing folks say is like that infrastructure, right? Like it costs to pay, knock on doors. Even if you have volunteers, right, you still want to feed them. You still want to give them refreshments. You still want to do all the things, right? It pays. I've seen some of the material on your website. I'm sure it costs to get graphic designers and printing and all the things that it takes to bring, to get that sort of like educational material and going back to what Dr. Teamer said, like in strengthening legal aid, obviously that, takes some cost as well. And I'm glad you brought up the loss of Medicaid. I'm gonna kick this one to Stacey. So Invest in Louisiana has named that slow deterioration of the public safety net as a major legacy of this session, right? With over 200,000 Louisianans having lost Medicaid and 168,000 having lost SNAP. And we know that philanthropy cannot make up for the scale of loss of federal funding. So what is the most strategic thing that local funders can do right now to avoid the trap of filling gaps in ways that actually doesn't let the state off of the hook?
So the One Big Beautiful Bill, or HR 1, and I think beautiful is really the opposite of what we're talking about, is really one of the most consequential pieces of legislation at the federal level that we've seen in a very long time, and it is a historic cut across the country in the safety net. So we're looking at $1 billion taken out of Medicaid, and we're looking at changes to SNAP that are incredibly detrimental, not only for beneficiaries, but also for the state budget. So we all know all of this is connected. It's important to just kind of draw those lines and connect those dots. So when we're talking about redistricting, we're talking about congressional districts, that directly translates to federal legislation that gets passed that then trickles down to really hit Louisiana quite hard. So to just quickly kind of remind folks some of the key provisions in that are coming to Louisiana. For Medicaid, of course, we're going to have work reporting requirements. And I want to stress that word reporting because many of our Medicaid folks do work. We know that Louisiana is one of 5 states without a state minimum wage law, that $7.25 an hour is a poverty wage. You can work 40 hours a week and still be below the federal poverty limit at our state or federal minimum wage. So I'll leave that tangent for later because I also want to just acknowledge that legislation to create a state minimum wage was again defeated in this legislative session. So a lot of work remaining on that. But to come back to Medicaid, by January 1 of 2027, so just a few short months away, our beneficiaries who are on Medicaid in Louisiana, and again, that's 138% of poverty or below. So these are folks who are working, who are caregiving, are going to now need to report their work for eligibility for Medicaid. There are also in the out years a few other really important components for Medicaid and the state budget, and that includes the provider taxes that Louisiana uses to raise revenue so that we can satisfy the state share of the cost of Medicaid. HR 1 also included limits to new provider taxes and then eventually forces a step down in that rate of tax. And so what that means is in the coming years, the state is going to have its hands tied in how it normally has raised funds to pay for our part of Medicaid. And so I just want to forecast for folks that the work reporting requirements are coming very soon, and then additional constriction on the state budget and the way that we pay for our share is going to also be coming down the road. So these are really, really important. In addition to that, we're also looking at SNAP. So not only are we erecting barriers for folks to access just the ability to put food on the table, we're also looking at increased burden on the state to pay for not only a portion of the benefits, which has never had to do before. This is a federal program that has been able to put a little bit of money in people's pocket that then automatically gets spent in a local economy. This is not money that is extra that folks don't need. This is money that goes straight to a local grocery store, right? And so it really has trickle effects for local economies when you don't have those dollars going in. So we are looking at state burden for paying for a share of benefits, and part of that is tied to what are called error rates. And really that's over and under payments in the SNAP program as it's administered, and it's a measure of those error rates for Louisiana. We're looking at projections of up to $200 million almost in additional state costs because of HR 1 and the SNAP program. So again, and I know we'll talk a little bit more about what's coming down the pipe for the state budget, but these are really important considerations for our lawmakers. As far as how this shows up in community, we're looking at folks who just need to go to the doctor. Medicaid is not a check in your pocket. Medicaid is not cash. Medicaid is an insurance card that lets you go and get that immunization shot. It lets you make sure your chronic diseases are treated. Those are the things that are at risk as the safety net shrinks and gets shredded by HR 1. Part of this is we do need that coordination, we need the communication, we need to make sure that people who are still eligible are informed and are aware and can navigate the system as best as possible. We need to continue educating. Ultimately, what we need to do is repeal HR 1. Ultimately, we need to roll back all of the damage that really it's going to be doing. In the meantime, we also need to document what's happening. So you shared a few of the numbers. 200,000 Louisianans have lost Medicaid. Almost that many have lost SNAP. We need to continue to document that. And one of the most powerful things that we've done are the district fact sheets that you can take to your local elected official, your version of Senator Duplessis, right? And your version of the House, and show this is how many people are receiving SNAP benefits and Medicaid in their district. Because lawmakers do vote by their constituents, maybe not all the constituents, maybe not the ones that they should be listening to, but it's important to be able to show and make that connection. I also want to give some credit and some hope to folks when we talk about this. When the federal government shut down at the end of last year for a long period of time, you may remember that we were right on the verge of interruption of SNAP benefits, and that was going to happen right at Thanksgiving. Just a exceptionally horrible time for folks not to have access to SNAP benefits. The Louisiana legislature was one of the first in the nation to say, if this isn't what a rainy day fund is for, I don't know what it is, right? And so the state does have, I think, an awareness that some of these programs are important, right? I'm smiling because they're all important, right? But there is an awareness and there is an ability to act. And so as we've talked about voice and we've talked about community, there are ways that local elected officials can limit harm, that can reverse some of this. And so I want to encourage that we know that there is hope, that we know that this is not something that just happens to us, right? That we can also help to shape those outcomes. But it's hard to overstate both redistricting and HR 1 at this point.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And you mentioned the state budget, that this reduction will make a $200 million state burden for us to have to pay, right? And then there's already like this looming budget shortfall. Like, what can we, I mean, this is just a simple question. Like, is there anything that we can do?
Well, I won't take up too much time, but I'll say you can raise revenue. There are choices to, what the state can do. Now, I will say in this political environment, that's incredibly hard to do. But the truth is, in Louisiana, we raise taxes in a very regressive manner. And, we did a survey, we commissioned a survey to look at, we're going into a fiscal session next year. That's when we can look at our tax structure. So where is it that Louisianans want to see us, right, put money? Well, one, they value the safety net. It's, an 80% approval for Medicaid. It's a 75% approval for SNAP. It's an overwhelming approval. And voters also said, a majority, 61%, that if you, that they want to preserve the safety net more than they want income tax cuts. And so it's really important that lawmakers, again, understand, if you ask the people what they want, please do it. Please, please do the thing that local people have elected you to office to do, which is make sure that we have a strong safety net for our neighbors and for ourselves when we fall in hard times. So, I do want to give some time for folks to talk about the budget. I will say this was a standstill budget this year. Within that, the caveat is not everything was standstill. Some things lost and other things gained. And I do want to call out that there was additional funding for prisons and not additional funding for teacher pay raises. So we call it standstill, but that doesn't mean that everything stood still. Next year is not. And so there's going to be tough choices. But you don't have to live with that. You can raise revenue, and you can do it equitably, and you can do it in a progressive way that doesn't harm and continue to kind of compound harm on low-income communities.
Thank you. Thank you. And I know all of you mentioned in the beginning about like this way of governing, and I assume that this is kind of what you mean by this way of governing, just pretty regressive. Okay, I'm gonna shift a little bit to be a little more local. And this question is for you, Senator Duplessis. New Orleans was not a driver of state policy this session, but instead seemed to be a target of it, which you mentioned earlier, right? And we've seen this growing pattern of state government trying to centralize control over the city, such as eliminating elected officials and cutting court positions, threatening our local utility regulation. So, like, what is your honest assessment of the immediate impact? And you mentioned a little bit around criminal justice, as well as where this trajectory might lead us.
Sure. So definitely got some concerns about the immediate impact of several of the bills that were targeted at New Orleans. And most of them fell under the umbrella of criminal justice in the city of New Orleans. So everything from cutting 3 criminal district court judges to nullifying an entire election where our clerk of criminal district court was not seated. I still believe it was completely unconstitutional, despite what the Louisiana Supreme Court did in affirming that horrible move. So you have that in addition to the legislature cutting $500,000 from our DA's budget. And the thing that makes all of this so twisted is that this same legislature, this same conservative supermajority legislature, is the same legislature that rails on New Orleans for crime being out of control and us needing to do more to fix crime in the city of New Orleans. Well, I don't know how you do that when you're literally cutting the resources and undermining the very system that you claim to be trying to help. What they did through all of these measures will ultimately make it harder and for victims. It'll make cases take longer to get through the system because you have fewer judges now. DAs have less resources. So this is actually going to be more burdensome on those who need justice as opposed to making it more efficient and more effective to achieving justice. So just pointing that out. In addition to that, this is completely contrary and goes against the very core principle of what conservatism is supposed to be about, which is local government knowing best. This undermines local government that's closest to the people, that's closest to the problems. And that's the bigger long-term concern that I have with all of what they're doing, because it's New Orleans today, tomorrow it'll be Baton Rouge, next it'll be Shreveport, and other cities that are going to be in line for this sort of state takeover, if you will, to undermine the voices of the people who live in these communities, to make the people who live in these communities feel as though their voices don't matter, and to pit local leaders against one another. I think that's part of the real long-term strategy, to be honest with you. I mean, I think that because none of this really made any practical sense. Crime in New Orleans is at an all-time low. At an all-time low. So we should be focused on celebrating what's working right in the city of New Orleans and continue to invest in that. However, what we saw was the exact opposite. Crime is at an all-time low. So what did outside leaders do? They chose to attack the very system that is seeing progress and seeing gains be made, because That's not what they want. They don't want New Orleans to be able to say they want anything. Now it's like, okay, let's disrupt it, have local leaders in those systems now have to fight against each other, whether they're deciding on who's running for what seat now or trying to figure out who was behind what move. It creates distrust, it creates skepticism and fear. And that I think is a play by those who can't impose their policies on the city of New Orleans in another way. So they're saying, all right, let's disrupt it in this way just to show we have power and control over a city. But again, the 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 longer, more long-lasting impact that I'm concerned about, in addition to how it's going to immediately impact our criminal justice system, is more people could feel disaffected. More people could be led to believe that their voice doesn't matter. They say, well, when Calvin Duncan was running, people said, oh, he couldn't win, and it doesn't make any sense to vote. Then he wins by a landslide and still can't take his seat because they abolished the seat, nullified the election essentially, and denied the voices of an entire city. So that could lead that same voter who went out and voted for the first time to say, see, I told you so, my voice doesn't matter. That addressing that voter and voters like that is the big issue that we have to address to ensure that this doesn't lead to more people feeling disaffected and more apathy and people just disengaging. But I want to reconnect it to a point that Ashley made earlier, in that I think just the opposite is happening. If we take and we have to be intentional about harnessing that energy of people being angry and upset with what was done. And you don't have to just be from New Orleans. We need people across the state to be angry and upset about this. And political parties have to step up. Political leaders have to step up. Non-governmental organizations, nonprofits, philanthropic groups all have to step up to harness that anger and that frustration to turn it into something meaningful. Otherwise, we'll miss this opportunity, and we will fall victim to what their plan is. So I think this is much bigger than Republican and Democrat. This is really about democracy, and this is really about ensuring that we have a democracy, because what we saw to take place this last legislative session was so much bigger than one position. It was so much bigger than judgeships that were cut, and it was literally about whether or not we have a democratic process, because I think that's what they're trying to undermine. We see it happening at the national level, because when Louisiana chose to once again lead the race to the bottom after the Calais decision came down, which we did not have to do. Not only was Ashley right in saying that there were additional maps that we could have drawn, we didn't even have to draw a map when we did it. We didn't even have to do it. We could have called a special session. We could have gone through a lot of different processes. It didn't have to happen in a rushed manner in which it was done, and they nullified another election because we were in an election. We were in a party primary for Congress, and my understanding is that about 40,000 ballots had been returned already. They just basically canceled an election illegally, in my opinion, and we didn't have to do that. But Louisiana chose again to lead the race to the bottom by playing national politics. And again, I want the people of Louisiana to be upset about it and to respond. And the only way that we can do that is by educating people around the effects of this, and not waiting until this happens again. Like, this is the time right now we really have to be upset about this and go out and make our voices heard, not just during election time, but like the way that those thousands of people showed up at the Capitol and were there and said, we don't care how much you try to confuse us by rescheduling meetings or doing it with less notice, and providing and creating these barriers to make it harder for us to testify. We're going to be here when you start. We're going to be here when you finish. I was in that committee hearing when it started, I think at 7 p.m. We did a whole day of regular session, and those days are very taxing on the regular. Then we went into committee at 7 p.m. and didn't end until, like, I think we took the vote like before 5 a.m. We didn't get out of there until about 5:35, but there was still hundreds of people who stayed to the very last second. And to me, that speaks to a level of resistance that we know is greater than any majority that currently exists in the legislature, because we know that the majority of the people throughout this state do not agree with what was done this legislative session. And nobody showed up to support what was being done, which is another very clear example that what's representative, what the legislature is currently made up is not representative of how the people of Louisiana truly feel. And we have to make that connection with people across this state and move beyond the fight around just party D versus R, because Democrats are mad with Democrats, Republicans are mad with Republicans, and we just got to get back to those basic issues of how all of these policies are hitting people and affecting their lives positively or negatively, whether we're talking about healthcare, whether we're talking about voting rights, whether we're talking about clean water, homeowners insurance, workforce development, job opportunities. People just really want to survive and thrive in this state. But now is the time for people to wake up. And I just think philanthropic community plays a huge role in helping to educate people on the importance of why they have to stay engaged and stay participatory in this process, no matter how daunting it may be at this time.
Thank you for that. Do any of you think that it will be possible when there will be opportunities to have another majority minority district?
Yeah, look, the thing about democracy is that it's never ended. It never ends. I mean, we've been at redistricting now for just for this term, I should say, for this census, what, Ashley, 5, 6 years now? I
Yeah,
mean,
we've either been in court or some form of legislative session since 2022. And that doesn't include census and road shows and
right,
all the things before that. And so, I mean, this has been, I mean, so basically we've been redistricting the entire period. And so this is supposed to happen once and then
right.
set the map for the next 10 years. And we have redistricted pretty much every year through this process, trying to get to fair and equitable maps. And so I have to believe, right, that we can get back to a place where fair and equitable actually means something. And then, and I also often talk too about the fact that folks think, reporters say like, well, other than representation, what else does this mean? And I was like, there's no, like, representation is it. Like, citizenship, core and key to citizenship is representation. My ability to have someone that looks like me, someone that has had the same experiences of this country as me in the halls of Congress, in my state legislature, my city council, and my school board. I have to be able to have someone that can bring my experience to the policymaking spaces, at every level of government. And when you take that away, then you force me to become a consumer only. And, and I had a professor remind me there's no such thing as second class citizenship, right? Like, either you have it or you don't. And, at this moment, we find ourselves, truly being pushed, as Black and other minorities. And I remind folks, minority includes all people of color and women of every race and ethnicity. This is not just about, this isn't just about Black people or Black political power. It has the biggest effect and impact on Black political power, but this is about, all of us. And so I absolutely believe, Royce was making the point that I've been screaming from the mountaintops. And I just heard the former, or soon to be former congressman from Tennessee talk about the fact that the South is on fire. The Supreme Court in Calais made their decision, swore that the South had changed, it no longer needed race remedies. And then within an hour, all of us were, all of the Southern states were in some form of redistricting and trying to, undo the work that has been done over the last, 6 years. And, and I think that what I have been saying is that, like, as goes the South goes the nation, it has never been more true. It's coming to a town near you. And so I think that folks look at this redistricting as, oh, the South is just being the South. And what I think that people need to understand that this is way more insidious than it has been. I mean, it always has been insidious, but but that what is happening is that there's an exponent on how quickly things are changing, right? Like we're nullifying, elections, and that's not just Louisiana. Alabama did it as well. We're seeing some of the same things happening in Georgia. I mean, and so we have to pay attention to like what is coming out of the South and how quickly the South is creating different kinds of behavior that is undermining the power of voice, and certainly the power of the voter. And so I just want to, so for me, it's like not only does this country have to pay attention to what's happening in the South right now, but then also too, the South has to also pay attention to what's happening to New Orleans, right? Like what happens to, like what happens to New Orleans is absolutely coming to a town near you. And what's unfortunate is that the towns that they're focusing on are majority African American. They're the towns that actually provide the economic tax base. I mean, New Orleans is the economic engine of this state. And so, like New Orleans has a lot of power. And so, and it has consistently said, New Orleans has consistently said, we're not going to play these games with the state because we understand the power that we have. But they're finding ways around that. And I think that, that's what's so powerful about the next set of elections that we have, both in November, but then also in 2027. Guys, we have to, as a country, elect a new Congress that's going to restore voting rights and that's going to do the work of the people. And I think that people don't think that's possible, but I didn't think all this bad stuff was possible either. So at the end of the day, like the same ways in which we've undermined this democracy and undermined the institutions like the Department of Education and other, things that we thought could never be undone or untouched, we have to also be able to bring in a Congress that's going to actually restore rights and actually move quickly to address cuts to Medicaid and SNAP, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Like that at the end of the day, if all of the bad things can happen this quickly, then the good things can happen as well. So I absolutely have to believe that we can restore democracy. I absolutely believe that, there is a reckoning with with the people in this country saying that they don't want this, and that there's just enough things that are wrong in every possible way, right? Whether you're buying groceries or putting gas in your car, or your homeowner's insurance isn't paying up after a storm, right? Like whatever that is, that people are saying like government is not serving us and it's not working, and we just need to be alert, pay attention, and do continue to do this work.
Thank you. Yeah, speaking of those elections, I mean, and I know you talk about we have to get folks in Congress. Do we have folks that we can get in Congress?
I mean, I think, we've got a historic Senate candidate on the Senate side. I mean, he's the first African American to make it to a Senate, a Senate race since Reconstruction. And so, I mean, there are some things that are happening and moving, in our state, and it's not just congressional. Like I said, it's Public Service Commission. It's these constitutional amendments. And again, voters have destroyed these amendments twice now, and they've done it to make sure. To me, it was like literally May 16th was right after they had drawn these maps and taken away the second majority minority district, and have 78% of voters vote this down. Like it never even got more than two parishes of support out of 64 to be able to move any of those amendments. And it was 65% the year before. And so again, like that indictment of this governor and this legislature, with the exception of our good friends, which include Senator Duplessis, like we've been seeing that voters are starting to stand up. And then I remind folks too, like these amendments have been defeated by the weirdest, strangest coalition of folks. It's Black voters, it's teachers, evangelicals. Like I don't, me and the evangelicals don't usually see eye to eye, but for 2 years now, we've been able to work together to do something that was really important for the people of the state of Louisiana. And so, I mean, like no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. You got to do the work that's important to save the state. And I always tell folks, everything I love is in this place. And I refuse to be moved, right? Like I refuse to have folks just strip what's left of this beautiful state and force those of us that love it dearly to not have to make a hard choice that we might not be able to live here. And I think that I'm not going to be moved, and I get to work with the folks on this call every single day. to fight for the kind of Louisiana that we want to live in. And I think it cannot be said enough. And I think Royce and Stacy, and Toya talked about this too, is that the people of Louisiana are more with us than they are against us. When I go around the state, there is a majority of folks that actually care about their neighbors, care about their friends, care about what's happening in their community. And so, like, we have to be able to move beyond the party politics and get to the people part, and get to people and neighbors caring about neighbors. And if we can break through some of that, which I think we have an opportunity in this moment to do, then I do think you can do that. And maybe it's not Louisiana that has the best choices to move into Congress, but we do have, like I said, an opportunity we haven't had since Reconstruction, which on the Senate side. And then I do think that we should absolutely send a message. We have the most powerful congressional delegation in the country right now. We have the Speaker, we have the Majority Whip, let lows on appropriations, and that delegation is undermining FEMA. That delegation, Speaker Johnson has the most Medicaid recipients in his district in the state of Louisiana, and he still did not negotiate and did not fight to protect his own constituents. And so, whereas we all saw other states fight for that because they understood what it meant to their state budget and what it meant to the constituents that they serve. And so I do think that has to be answered, right? Like, there has to be an answer to folks putting, national politics over the lived everyday experience of the people that they're supposed to represent.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we have about 12 minutes left. I just want to make sure everybody's good on the time. So we've talked about cuts to safety nets. We've talked about cuts to judges, courts, DA funding in New Orleans, and additionally, the legislature simultaneously criminalized homelessness. All of these decisions hit the most vulnerable residents the hardest. And Toya, we know that United Way sits at the intersection of many of these systems, right? And you briefed on it a little bit earlier, but can you talk about how they interact and compound for the families that you serve, particularly those Alice families, right? And then what are some cross-sector funding strategies that you think our members should consider to address all of these needs that now seem to span criminal justice, housing, food security, and health all at once?
Yeah, I would say definitely that the policy decisions don't operate in silos. And, my colleagues have talked about that since we've been on. And the one thing I will say about the people's voices, and I do think that we're going to have to speak to the people from where they are, especially, Ashley, as you talk about the fact that even for some of our politicians, we vote against the needs of the people within our district. So how do we educate those individuals to help them understand the impact? And then how do the people put the pressure on those who are making these decisions to do what's best for them? So, these things kind of stack. So a family losing Medicaid is often the same family facing housing instability, court involvement, or food insecurity. And so the 2026 session created a cascade of pressures that will require philanthropy to fund systems, bridging solutions, not single issue interventions. And that's what we have to think about. And we have to present this in a way that they understand the global impact and not just the specific areas that each of our organizations may be interested in, but how do each of those priorities impact the larger individuals, especially as we talk about our Alice families, which are asset limited, income constrained, but employed. And so some of those sector funding strategies that I thought about for GNOFN is fund integrated service hubs, support organizations that combine benefit, access, legal aid, housing stability, and behavioral health under one roof. Families need one door, not 10. And that's another thing. They don't even have the time to kind of go through the processes, which is why I'm always excited with the United Way that we're focusing on our prosperity centers in each of the 7 parishes that we serve. We also need to invest in navigation infrastructure. And what I mean by that is the loss of Medicaid and SNAP means families need to help reapplying, appealing, or finding alternatives. So funding community health workers, benefit navigators, mobile outreach teams is going to be key around the philanthropy piece. Another part is strengthening the justice, health, housing continuum. And I kind of put those together because homelessness is now criminalized. Philanthropy can, support court-based social workers, diversion programs, reentry and stabilization services, and eviction prevention and rental assistance. And then I would say, finally, fund advocacy and systems change work, which many of them are already doing, but I just feel like we're going to have to accelerate. We have to move from putting ourselves in what I call reaction mode to proactive mode. Ashley, you said something that I fell right into that too, where I'm like, there's no way they're going to do this. There's no way they're going to accomplish this. And what did they do? Because we, from a humanity perspective, felt like they could not do this to their own people. We kind of let our guard down, which put us in a reactionary mode. So philanthropy cannot and should not replace public systems, but we can support coalitions like Power Coalition, like Invest Louisiana, like the United Way. We can fund policy research and narrative change, which we know we have entities across the state that's already doing that. And we can continue to build community organizing capacity. And as we talked about, not just around when it's time to vote, but incrementally reminding people how what we have approved as legislators or been signed off by the governor actually impacts their daily lives. And keep that anger and frustration, but in a constructive way, by the education, by the empowering, by them holding their legislators accountable for the state that they find themselves in. So I'm gonna get off of my
No, thank you for that. Thank you for that. And so our members work together at what we call action tables, right? Our work is focused on very specific sectors. This includes climate, environmental justice, criminal justice, health, economic and workforce development, Black men and boys, and then education, which kind of runs from early childhood all the way to higher education. And we've talked about a lot. Is there anything within these areas that we haven't talked about that you think is important for our members to know? And it's okay to say no. It's okay to say, look, we've covered it all. But if there is something that we haven't covered, please, and this is open for everyone. So just, feel free to chime in. And then we can close out on one last thing.
One thing that I would just lift up, and it's not even, I think we've covered so many of the issues and there's so much more, right? I mean, we haven't even opened the box that is early childhood education in this state, and both the challenges and the opportunities in that particular sector. But one of the things that I wanted to lift up as well is that, resources for communications is also really important. Like it takes a lot to communicate with community. And Keisha, you mentioned it earlier. It's like, I got a graphic designer, like it's fascinating what people think that community deserves.
Yeah.
Which I was like, we're all community. What do you mean? Right. And folks are like, well, why are you using such nice paper? And I was like, because I don't care who you are. Like you need a piece of paper that's going to hold up while you walk around and talk to 30, 40 people at the Capitol. Right. And I think that, people think that it's not important or that it shouldn't matter. And I just want all people to feel valued, especially if they're engaging with Power Coalition or any of our partners. And so, not only do we, do our own literature and all the things, but we also support a lot of folks at the Capitol for their days at the Capitol, their printing costs and different needs. We've lent our graphic designer, but also too, like that comms. I mean, there's not enough air that gets to the things that are happening to people here in Louisiana. And so we've also been working with a national firm to make sure that we can just push as much as we can on redistricting. I'm getting ready to do op-ed series. I've been working with the Atlantic and different, news outlets to try to just make sure that this conversation doesn't die, and to make sure that there's a spotlight on what is happening in the South. And I think that those are the things that have to continue to happen, because I think that we have typically these issues get shut out of the media, or they're not covered in a way that actually relates to people what's getting ready to happen. Because we also did mention that with these Medicaid cuts, that our rural hospital system, which is already strained, which has already been significantly cut, these are jobs. These are jobs that are going to go away in places where there are no jobs. And so your only option in some of these rural communities is going to be to work for the jail or the detention center. And that can't be the only thing that the only engine in a community. And so I do want folks to realize all the dominoes that fall when we start to talk about these things, that it's not just about people losing access to healthcare. It is about people losing their, like it's people losing access to healthcare because in a clinic not being able to stay open, and for the 30 people that work at that clinic to be able to keep their jobs because there's just no funding to be able to support, that clinic. And when we talk about maternal health and these other issues, all of that's going to be exacerbated because they're already traveling 2 hours to get to a doctor's appointment. And so I just want people to think about like the dominoes that fall when we allow these kinds of terrible things to happen, and why we need to keep communicating both in state, but also making sure that we're getting air to the issues that we're facing, and how what's happening in Louisiana. Again, I always tease, I was like, it's coming wholesale to the rest of this country within a year. If you think about any terrible policy that you can think of, I mean, they're all seated in Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and then they're wholesale to the rest of the country. Everybody, they laugh, they call us ignorant. It's like, we're not ignorant. We just have an imbalance of power, and we are working within a system where, like where now with the Calais decision, where they've almost forced us to not be able to have the kind of power and voice that we need to be able to change things, especially with a third of the population of the state being African American and not being able to elect, candidates of choice. And I don't think we've seen the last of redistricting here in the state. I think we've seen it at the congressional level. And I think that, because it was so unpopular and had the impact that it had, I think it's the only reason we haven't seen it yet. But I do think that we need to be worried about it. I think it's unfortunate, but I do think that I don't put anything past these guys. And as Toya said, I mean, every time I think they couldn't possibly do that, right? Here we are in what the next nightmare. And I think that that's another piece of this too, is that, guys, we have been fighting for 365 days. It used to be that we would have a break. They just in a legislative session, we could take a deep breath. And the reality is that there's no longer a moment in this calendar when we get to take a deep breath. I mean, we are either fighting constitutional amendments, special sessions, constitutional conventions. I mean, we have been fighting, at least in these last 3 years, I mean, nonstop around all of these different issues, trying to educate, trying to inform, trying to make sure that there was enough energy, trying to support our elected officials, because that's another really critical piece of this. Senator Duplessis can't fight by himself. He needs cover. He needs the angry mob. He needs all the things to be able to show up and also to be able to draw from, right? And so I do think that like those pieces of this have been really daunting for those of us doing this work, is that the new strategy is just to exhaust us. And again, we're here for it. I mean, we're from Louisiana. I always tease folks. It was like, if you got time, I got time.
Yeah, yeah.
But I would like a break. I would.
Yeah. Go ahead, Stacey. I think I saw you off mute earlier.
Well, I'm gonna kind of build on what Ashley said. I think I heard years ago that advocates are the B team, right? We be here before you got here. We'll be here when you're gone. And I just really want community to know in their heart that, again, these legislative sessions come and go, and there are times that are really, really hard like now, and there are times where we've had great wins. And so we're going to just continue working. We're going to continue fighting for those wins, and we're going to continue to try to protect the gains that we've had, to defend them, and also to shine a light on the actual harm that's caused. You heard Ashley talk about closures for rural hospitals. They were very strategic in the way that the HR 1 different provisions rolled out. And there's, maybe there's a reason why those work reporting requirements aren't until the midterms are over. That's really going to hit people at the beginning of 2027. The rural hospitals, we have a rural hospital stabilization fund that takes the pain, the sting out of the beginning. It's not nearly enough to cover what's going to be cut over a decade. And so it's really important that the decisions that get made are translated and really kind of decoded and put into plain language so that community understands this wasn't an invisible force that happened. This was a decision that was made that's having these consequences in community. And so I'm grateful for all the people on this call. I'm grateful to get to do this work. Like Ashley said, we're gonna keep doing it as long as we're able in Louisiana. So thank y'all for the time. I'll let some other folks get the last word in.
Yeah, thank you. Normally, because I'm looking at our managing director who always wants to end on something hopeful, which, I certainly admire her for that. But it sounds like, to me, I hear a lot of hope too. Hope around like the energy and the fire behind people wanting to mobilize and supporting this. Does anybody want to close us out with something that's hopeful? Don't all speak at once.
People are showing up.
Yeah.
People are hearing their voices heard. I mean, I think that no one's taking any of this lying down. And so, like no one can say that we're just ignorant and we're just, letting all this stuff happen to us. Like, we are fighting. And I think that as somebody that's been doing this for a long time, this is the most fight that I've seen in a minute. And it feels so good. I mean, I think that, let's be clear. I mean, Calais was devastating. This case has my name on it, right? And to have your name on something that historically is undermining the very thing that you get up and work for every day, I mean, that's devastating for me. And I want to be like 100% about that. But let me tell you, the only thing that's kept me together and kept me clear about what we need to do has been just the outpouring of people in this state showing up time and time again to fight for the democracy that we know we deserve, and to be able to see the power of the people. And I think that, it has buoyed me. It has reminded me also too, like how much leadership we've also seen in this moment. I would say this even if he wasn't on the call, but I mean, Senator Duplessis has been a rock. I mean, he's been fighting this redistricting fight from us from day one. I mean, he has not faltered. He has been there. He has heeded the call every time that we've called upon him to lead in this moment. And I think that those are the things that remind me that, one, I'm not by myself in any way, right? I'm not by myself in community, and I'm not by myself in leadership when it comes to these fights. I stand, shoulder to shoulder with Stacy and Dr. Claire Barnes team. We're all together, like fighting this fight, and we're not afraid. That's the other thing too. Like, I'm not afraid. I'm, like I said, a little beaten up, but not afraid. And I know exactly what work we need to do. Like I said, we're going to do the work that's left, which is to close the registration gap. And like I said, I want to see Obama, first time voter turnout for Black and other minority voters. That's what I'm working towards, because I feel like that has to be the response to Calais. Is that, if you're trying to take away people's vote and their voice, you can do that in some ways, but once you see it en masse, I mean, there's really some opportunity for Black and other minority voters to really have their voices heard this fall. And for that, I'm really grateful. And I think that it is the light that I see, that I'm running towards as, we try to understand all the ways that this Calais decision is going to continue to have impact on the work.
And I would say, Keisha, I believe in hope, but sometimes when we think about hope, people think about hope from a stagnant perspective, like we're going to sit back and hope for. So I've defined hope as harnessing our people's energy to help themselves move forward in this fight. So I'm redefining hope as something that is active and not passive.
Okay, I can't top that. And I really just truly appreciate that. And I'm glad I was off camera, because I'm like, yes, I'm crying. I'm, doing all the movements here. So thank you for taking and naming it for the funders, for our work, and for this collective work that we will do together. Just really went through the wins, the upsets, the anger, the frustration, but also, as you just rounded out for us, the new hope and definition for hope, and also the encouragement. that there is a path forward with very strategic and concrete steps that and the roles that we all play in it. So thank you so much for today, Keisha, Dr. Keisha Smith. As always, you just led an amazing conversation. It is recorded. We will share it and let us know if you want it and can repurpose it as well. But thank you so much. And I know this is just Monday, but we are here with and for you as we continue to make the most for the people of our city and our state.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good one, everybody.